I think a big component of that shift too is instant gratification, right? So social media and getting things immediately, getting praise, getting appraisal, I think right now is a lot of young athletes struggle with getting results now, right? And so that shift is coming from, instead of like an outcome focused mentality, we really want athletes to be process focused, right? And that helps shift away from everything that we can't control to the things that are within our control, right? What's my process? What am I committed to do every day to get 1% better, right? Or to just move that needle a little bit closer to our end goal.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is a certified mental performance consultant and the CEO of TG Performance, as well as she was a two-time All-American in her collegiate career. Please welcome to the Elev8 Podcast, Theresa Giunta.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, wanted to start out by giving our listeners a little bit more about you, and if you could share a little bit about yourself and what kind of led you into the work you do and doing TG mental performance.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a certified mental performance consultant. So that is the credential through the Applied Association for Sport and Performance Psychology. So basically the gold standard of the field, where we work with high performers in athletics and sports, in business, and in the military. So my primary focus is in athletics and in business. And so what led me to a career in sport and performance psychology is I was an athlete myself. Probably the majority of the people in this field started in sports, and that's what led them to wanting to give back, right? So I was primarily a lacrosse player growing up, and in college, I played at Westchester University, which is a Division II school right outside of Philadelphia. And in college, it really tested my mentality. And I realized very quickly that if I can figure out how to use my mentality to work for me, I'm going to be a much better player. And so I actually started reading this book called Mind Gym by Gary Mack. I recommend it to all of my young athletes. And I actually started like training my brain on my own without even realizing that was a thing. And I accomplished more than I ever imagined playing a collegiate sport. And so coming out of college, like I didn't even know there was a field that I could go into for this, right? And so I started talking to my professors, and they were like, hey, if you want to work with athletes in psychology, highly consider a master's degree in sports psychology. And I was like, what? That's a thing? And so, 15 years later, that's common. It's awesome that people know about the field. And then so I went on to Temple to get my master's in sport psychology, and started a business right out of college. I had a business partner at the time that was called Summit Performance Consulting. We owned and operated that for 5 years. We were really successful working in the collegiate space. COVID hit, we decided to go our separate ways, and that's when TG Performance bloomed. And ever since then, that was 2021. I have just been building, my book of business with working with athletes from the age of 10 all the way up to college. I've worked with an Olympian and now getting more into the business and corporate space as well. And I like to say, if you can own your mindset, then you're going to own your results.
Yeah, I had noted that because I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was, if you want to control your performance, you got to control yourself.
Yep.
Because I felt like self-control was a struggle for
Yeah.
me as an athlete sometimes. But yeah, talk to me more about that, about owning your mind and being able to kind of own your performance. Because I think even, especially those younger athletes, that own my mind, own like that. How do I do
Me.
that? What does
Yeah.
that entail?
What does that
Um,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of those intro and those steps that we can help kind of that student athlete age start to kind of at least take in the reins and can take in control?
Yeah, so it's shifting from an external focus to an internal one. I like to say that you are your only limit. And when I talk to athletes, a lot of the pressure that they experience, they might say it's from a coach or a parent or an opponent or getting recruited, right? Which, yes, like it can absolutely, pressure can be influenced from those things, but it's actually our perception of those things that cause pressure, right? And so we as humans actually create that for ourselves. And so when I say you're your only limit, well, you actually are the one that can decide what a situation means to you,
Yeah.
right? And putting those expectations or on a situation, when athletes can let go of expectation and focus more on their standards and the process of reaching those achievements, that's when you really start to own your own mentality, right? And being able to train your mind, right? So if you're not, say an athlete is really confident in one setting but not another, right? That's a really good awareness piece to say, hey, you know what, I got this down pat, but I'm really going to focus on this setting and training
Yeah.
myself to be really confident in this setting.
Love it. Comes to kind of training the mind. If uh, Combine one of my favorite questions here that I like to ask. Like one is if you could wave a magic wand, but tomorrow, if you could wave a magic wand and tomorrow at practice, every coach dedicates 5 minutes to mental performance that isn't doing that at this time. What piece of advice would you give them to invest those 5 minutes in?
Yeah, we can do a lot in 5 minutes.
Just like that, they would think that about
Yep.
skills and drills, right?
Exactly. Yep. I would say dedicate that to some sort of imagery or visualization work. We see everything twice, first in our minds and then actually in reality when we're doing something, right? And so what we believe or what we think is typically what we do. Right. So if I'm spending 5 minutes every day to picture what I want my outcome to be of that day or my purpose in my performance, most likely that's going to happen, right? In lacrosse, right? If I want to focus on shooting that day and my accuracy, then let me picture myself actually shooting to the corners of the net, right? Let me feel the stick in my hand. Let me visualize and imagine what my body feels like moving in space, right? And when I can do that, I'm actually training the neural pathways in my mind when I'm imagining it to be stronger and more realistic to when I do that in real life. And so I'm actually like, yeah, what I see is what I do, right? So why not imagine the things that I desire to do?
Yeah, love it. Uh, what are some things that you also observe young athletes as they shift from working from that external to that internal? What are some things that you find that they struggle with or challenges that you consistently see young athletes coming up against? Some are the same and some are different than I think when we were athletes.
Absolutely. I think a big component of that shift too is instant gratification, right? So social media and getting things immediately, getting praise, getting appraisal. I think right now is a lot of young athletes struggle with getting results now, right? And so that shift is coming from, instead of like an outcome focused mentality, we really want athletes to be process focused, right? And that helps shift away from everything that we can't control to the things that are within our control. right? What's my process? What am I committed to do every day to get 1% better, right? Or to just move that needle a little bit closer to our end goal.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is really where I see some of the light bulbs go off or the breakthrough happens with athletes when they really start to own their own process and progress. And that's a way and different from anybody else's.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because I think um, in the football world where I spend a lot of time, there's a lot of very successful coaches that preach the process,
Mhm.
and that message gets regurgitated. And then I've worked with teams where I'll ask kids, I'm like, "Do you know what the process is?" And they're like, and so I think it's just like you kind of said, like you have to be able to help know what that is.
Right.
When we're asking people to be committed to it, and coaches have to be able to share that vision in the daily standards that kind of match that. But can you talk a little bit more? Because I think the other thing that kind of goes with that is sometimes kids are really great at setting goals. I want to be all state. I want to be varsity. I want to be award winning, and those things that come at the end of the season, right? We don't know who votes on them or what that's going to be celebrated, or the numbers aren't totaled to the end of the year about our goals and defense. But how can we help kids break it down into a process that they do know they can regurgitate and focus on in one day?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. Like, well, what is the process, right? Like, how do you define that? What does that look like? And Brian Miles, a very
Yeah.
amazing CNPC in the field, working in the MLB, spoke on this. I was listening to a podcast that he recorded a little bit ago, and he was talking about like, yeah, what is the process, right? And that can look different for everybody. And it's the daily work that you're putting in every day, right? That you can control. And yeah, it's great to have aspirations to be on varsity or to get this accolade, right? But then if that doesn't happen, are you satisfied with the work that you put in every day?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you are, that success, right? Because who picks those results, right, is not in your control,
Yeah.
right? And you could be the best to your ability, but you might have somebody in the same area, right, that's a little better, right? But when we compare you to you, that's really what we want, what the process is for athletes is comparing you to you and seeing your own improvement and betterment every day. And I would say that's the process.
Yeah. I like the you versus you is so important because I think we start to see that copycat mentality happens in sports, right? That works. Let's try it. Let's try it. But when it comes to an individual, there's something to be said, and I'd love to hear you expand on, where it comes in being authentic, and
Mhm.
that just because that was their process for that path doesn't mean that you have to replicate that starting right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's the comparison trap, right? And I think there can be a healthy dose of that, right?
Yeah.
But like, I mean, as a CNPC, we're all speaking about the same things, right? To athletes, the same concepts. And so even sometimes myself, I feel myself get caught in that comparison trap. But I think it's coming back to knowing who you are as a performer and what you value and letting that lead your process,
Yeah. Love
right?
it.
And that's how you're showing up, like you said, authentically and standing out to others or making your impact. And I think that's really important. And an individual's competitive advantage is based on their own unique strengths and then how they are leveraging those in a performance setting.
Yeah. Love it. When it comes to those coaches that kind of guide our processes in teams, in your experience as an athlete, was there a coach that stood out to you that really was more influential or help you understand or some of these things?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have a lot of really great coaches growing up, and some not so great.
Fair, fair.
Um, and so I think it was a combination of learning that a coach might not see me for my strengths, but the right coach will. And so I really under that really was highlighted when I got to college. And I was given the opportunity. Um, I would say like speed was my greatest asset, and I leveraged that. And my coaches in college gave me freedom to use my speed as a competitive advantage. And not saying that wasn't used in other ways, but it allowed me to build my confidence around like one of my greatest assets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I was given the freedom to do that and almost like given permission that I can do certain things. And I think that is what makes a great coach is they see you for who you are and leverage your strengths and challenge your limits to get outside your comfort zone. And I think that that's also very important is coaches need to push and challenge an individual's limits for them to kind of excel.
Yeah. When it comes to our limits, sometimes we unexpectedly in sports and life that adversity hits us. Is there a moment of adversity in your life that you'd be willing to share about that? Looking back, it was something that really was hard then, but you're so glad it gives you the strength it does now.
Yeah, a big one that stands out to me is in high school and going into college. My freshman year of high school, I was one of three freshmen that were pulled up to the varsity team. We had a lot of upperclassmen. And I was uh, like, first of all, high school girls are really mean and catty, right? So if you're a high school girl listening, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You'll get through it. Um, but I was getting put down for that, right? Like, oh, she's not good enough to be up there. Why is she getting pulled up over me? Da da da. And I actually started to hide. Like I
Mhm.
didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want the varsity coach to put me in. So I just like did the bare minimum. And at one point, my parents were like, "What is going on with you?" Right? And it was this like, hey, just a reminder, go out there and try your hardest to do your best, right? That's all that matters, right? Like, what are you going to be proud of? And then that was kind of the switch to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I am just going to go play my game, right? And, bullying kind of followed me throughout high school and a little bit into college. And I realized that all I need to do, right, is how am I going to show up every day and be proud of what I'm putting out into the world and onto the field, right? And how am I inspiring others to do the same, right? Because if I'm trying my hardest and putting in the hardest work, then hopefully another teammate is doing the same,
Mhm.
right? And then that earned me, the achievements that I had, throughout my life and in college. And I think that experience really taught me like, one, not to hide, right? And also like for you to shine, right? You also have to make others shine too,
Yeah.
right? Like we want to build each other up, and that's the power of a team and really like the basis of empowerment. And that, like, if you make others shine, you're gonna shine as well. Um, so that's just one example
Yeah.
in my career.
I appreciate you sharing. Uh, how did that, as a freshman in high school, getting that transition moment into that what you just described, how did that better help you when you made that transition to your college team, especially when you're like that said about not hiding and what was some of that you were like kind of felt maybe a little differently in that next big kind of collegiate transition?
Yeah, I think college sports are a little different, right? Everybody kind of levels out in their talent and skill level. And I just went in like saying, I'm going to try my hardest to do my best. And if that gets noticed, great. And I am so passionate, one about sports and then also the sport of lacrosse, that I just played with love and joy. And I think that is really what helped me grow. And I do the same thing now in like helping athletes do the same, right? Like I love this field and I love teaching mental skills. And I think that I would say is like my competitive advantage is like throwing in that joy and love and passion for mental performance and sports and helping athletes kind of unlock that for themselves.
Yeah. You mentioned before kind of, that teammates and that making others shine. And I think just like we brought up before that, getting external to get internal, but there's usually something to be said about when we are external, if we're being encouraging to others. Where is that if we are external? But can you talk a little bit about when we are putting ourselves in a place where hopefully maybe others can shine as well, what that can do for us and our team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, especially in team sports, right? Like you can't do everything yourself, right? And I've been a high school lacrosse coach for a total of 8 years. I just kind of finished a little tenure at a high school. And something that was a big part of our messaging as a coaching staff is we play as a system, right? There is not one individual that stands out over another. However, we highlight everybody's individual strengths, right? And so what might be best for you as an individual might not be best for the team, right? And that's a really hard concept to buy into, right? Especially in a recruiting time, like where it's just like, I need to get recruited, I need to do this, and I need to stand out. Well, if you make the person next to you stand out, guess what's going to be noticed? What you did to help them stand out,
Yeah,
right? And if you're playing for the person next to you, right? It actually removes the pressure that you have on yourself. I'm going to work really, really hard for you next to me because
yeah,
that's going to make not only you better, but I'm going to be working harder, right? And so something that I commonly say is, hey, I see your effort and now I'm going to raise that competition level,
mm,
right? Like kind of in poker, right? Hey, I see you and now I'm going to raise that bet,
yeah,
right? So you're constantly celebrating each other's successes and challenging them to be better.
yeah. I like how another guest we had in the past talked about kind of this, the dynamic of challenge and support. And I think
Mhm.
I'd love to hear first, kids still like being challenged. They do like challenge. But when it's absent of that support,
Mhm.
then those challenges get less desirable.
Yeah,
Can you
absolutely.
can you talk about how coaches can provide some of that right amount of challenge and support, and how sometimes that might look different athlete to athlete depending on what
Yeah.
stages and phases they are?
Sure. Yeah. So that balance of challenge support is so crucial to building resilience in athletes and having an environment that encourages failure and mistakes. And I think that's really where this balance of challenge and support gets tested, right? Because we want to create a safe environment that allows athletes to push their limits, take risks, and be comfortable enough that when they make a mistake or when they fail, right? It's not a oh, what are you doing? Or gosh, like don't do that again, right? But instead it's like, hey, try again,
Yeah,
right? Do it again. Keep going. Next rep, right? And even not so much of like, oh, it's okay, right? Like sometimes that's not supportive for an athlete, right? It's like a, hey, next time, right? Let it go, next rep, right? And getting these like constant reps in to know that like it's okay to keep going,
yeah,
right? And like there's some coaches like praise and correct in public, right?
mhm,
Some correct in private and praise in, vice versa, right? And so it's all the dynamic between that athlete and coach. And as long as that one, coaches are honest about how they're giving feedback, right? Athletes can adapt to that. And then also vice versa, right? So finding the right balance too of how coaches as a whole are supporting their team, but then balancing out like that individual support as well.
yeah. when it comes to some of that balance and all the stress that kids and student athletes face, what are some of the things that you see recovery wise that usually need some encouragement or help on? Or, as kind of those 80-20 things that if we're not doing these, then it's really hard to over visualize and compensate for
Yeah.
sleep admit. You can do, if you only slept 3 hours, we can't really out visualize that by tomorrow's competition.
And that's hard, right? Especially these athletes who, are at high academic schools and have a lot of things going on in their personal lives, right? It's like, how do we find the time to finish our homework and eat the right meals and get hopefully 6 hours of sleep, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the first thing I start with is sleep, is if you are not getting enough sleep, you are not going to perform in anything that you're doing in school, in sports, in your relationships, right? And so that's the first thing that we address. And so the second thing is like, I love a schedule, right?
Mhm.
Write down the actual times that you're doing your homework, that you're going to eat, that you're
Yep.
going to have a snack, that you're going to practice. Yes, does that take work and maybe a little extra time every night before you go to bed or every Sunday before you go into your week? But I promise you, you will actually find more time than you think you have,
Yeah. I love,
right?
I love that you brought that. I think it was Kirk Cousins, quarterback, when he was young in his NFL career. He had his schedule from when he woke up and went to bed broken down in 15-minute increments, right? Sometimes with even more in 5 minutes within that. But it was all color coded based on 15s at least. And it was, when he explained it to someone was, um, knowing that I had scheduled, this is the time I'm going to be with my family, this is what I'm going to be doing that. It helps you also usually, one, less stress, but two, be more present because
Mm-hmm.
you know what's coming, right? And I think that it creates that predictability and that sense of control that athletes don't get when it comes to game time. Uh, can you talk about some other ways when it comes to maybe that stress management, time management, tips and tricks that athletes can maybe help themselves with by doing a little bit of prep and planning?
Yeah, yeah, great. Well, one, like with scheduling, right, and compartmentalizing your tasks, it helps ease mental fatigue,
Mhm.
right? Because when you're trying to focus on so much at one time, you're actually fatiguing your brain, which is going to fatigue your body, right? So a really simple thing that athletes can do is have check-ins and reset buttons in their transitions
Mhm.
from tasks,
Yeah.
right? So let's just take a collegiate athlete who has, a lift at 6 a.m. followed by three classes, going into practice, needs to eat, all in between there, and then go to the library and study, right? And so any in between any natural transition, right? That student athlete can provide themselves with a reset button, right? So just for the sake of, being simple, right? Let's say they have 10 minutes in between each transition. Okay. Well, maybe the first transition, that 10 minutes is like just some breath work, right? I am just going to settle myself down. It's a busy day. Let me just enter the day with a calm state. That second transition of 10, right? Maybe it's coming from class to practice. I'm going to do 5 minutes of visualization to prepare me for practice, right? Then from practice to eating, I'm going to put my to-do list on what I'm going to study tonight, right? So it's like they are taking time to like reset and maybe decompress from their previous task and then set their focus on their next.
Okay, great advice. Uh, Last question that I always love to get your response to is if I got you a time machine and could send you back to teenage self, with all your experience and things you know now, what piece of advice would you want to share with your teenage self?
That's a great question. I would say be bold and Only care about what you think of yourself. Mm-hmm.